Hello again. Those celebrating Black History Month have something of difficulty when it comes to talking about actual historical black people who might reasonably be described as famous or high achievers. There are not all that many of them, and so they are forced to fall back on either fantasy or gross exaggeration. Fortunately, with the current mood in both Britain and America after the Black Lives Matter movement, this can usually be done without anybody challenging what is said or even displaying mild scepticism by raising their eyebrows. Nobody wishes to be seen as doubting the word of black people. This reluctance is traded upon, and so any old rubbish is trotted out with the certainty that most white people will, if not actually take the knee, at least refrain from ribald laughter. I'm sorry to say that the mainstream media collude with this foolishness, and during the month of October in Britain let black people claim pretty much anything they wish in the name of Black History Month. They even allow black people to make the most ludicrous claims in newspapers and on television. This really is a bit much, and somebody pointed me towards an especially awful instance of this on Monday. In the description to this video, I give a link to a piece in the newspaper called The Metro, which is handed out free to London commuters in the morning. It has a circulation of over 1 million. Let's see what Alicia Adejobi wrote in the Metro on October the 4th. In a piece headed Black History Month, Black British Heroes Who Deserve Their Own TV Shows and Films, she said that over the past year calls have only mounted for Black British history to be taught in schools so that the younger generation have the chance to learn about the forgotten heroes who are of colour that many adults weren't introduced to in the classroom. So this is her subject, black heroes. I hope everybody has that clear in their mind. She goes on to say, in July 2020, a report by The Guardian found that only 11% of pupils taking their GCSEs were studying modules that refer to black people's contribution to Britain. So, black heroes and black people's contribution to Britain, yes? Without further ado, let's see who she regards as a black hero and somebody who has made a contribution to Britain. She tells us about a black pop singer called Smiley Culture, who had a couple of hits in the mid-1980s. His success didn't last, and by 2008 he was involved in the large-scale importation of cocaine into Britain from Barbados. When I say large-scale, we're talking about 30 kilograms at a time. He was caught at this, arrested in 2010 and charged with conspiracy to supply cocaine. Shortly before he was due to appear in court, he committed suicide. The thumbnail to this video shows 3 people who were arrested at his home in possession of 1 kilogram of cocaine, and they were subsequently sent to prison. Okay, now I am seriously confused as to which aspect of this man's life were heroic, and also about the contribution which he made to Britain. Was it running drug mules and flooding the country with Class A drugs? Killing himself? Singing a pop song? Does Alicia Adejobi really not realise what a terrible impression this gives if she really thinks that any of this is heroic? Or that we should be celebrating the contribution such a man has made to this country? What about Queen Charlotte, the wife of King George III? Alicia Adejobi writes, many of us spent weeks learning about King Henry VIII and his 6 wives and even Custer's Last Stand. But how much time was spent educating us about our very own Queen Charlotte? She goes on to claim that Charlotte is now widely regarded as Britain's first black queen. Well, only among complete lunatics. I have talked about this nonsense before. Queen Charlotte was born in 1744. One of her distant ancestors, 500 years earlier, in the 1200s, was a Portuguese man called Alfonso III, and he had a lover called Madrigana, whom some people said was a Moor. Probably by that they meant a North African Arab or Berber. But even if she was as black as the Ace of Spades, this was 500 years before Charlotte was born. Does anybody seriously think that if they had a black ancestor at the time of the Tudors, that would make them black now? Completely bonkers idea. And even if it were to be the case, what is heroic about having a black ancestor 500 years before you were born? What contribution does this make to Britain? Then there's Mary Seacole, of course, whom we are told provided food and medicine for all and tended to the injured. There are also reports of her tending to the wounded while under fire from the enemy. She didn't provide food for all at all. She ran a restaurant in the Crimea which was exclusively for the use of officers. There were no sick or wounded men there. It was like an officer's mess. She sometimes joined the crowds of spectators who gathered to watch the battles between the British and the Russians, but her purpose in doing so was to sell refreshments to those watching the action. She sold food and drink. There's no record of her tending men under fire. She certainly never mentioned doing so in her autobiography, and she wasn't really the kind of person to leave out a detail of that kind. Then there's Claudia Jones, who helped start the Notting Hill Carnival in the late 1950s. The contribution which the carnival has made to Britain is not obvious to most people, other than in terms of the cost of policing and the number of people who are robbed and assaulted over those few days in August each year. Was it heroic to organise a carnival? Really? Charles Tull was a British soldier during the First World War, and I will concede that he was a hero. The other person, Rosalie Jones, was a firefighter for 30 years, which is a worthy enough occupation. But if she is a heroine, then every person who has joined the fire brigade must be placed in the same category. The thing which I find a little frightening is that the editor of the Metro surely knows perfectly well that dealing in drugs and killing oneself is neither heroic nor a brilliant contribution to Britain, just as he knows that King George III's wife wasn't black. Like so many white people, though, he is nervous of speaking out and denouncing this as the rubbish it is. The fear of being accused of racism is a potent one, which causes people to remain silent when the honest thing to do would be to speak out.